Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast Series. My name is Jeff Nix. I'm head of content research. My guest today is Evan Bressler of Pactiv Evergreen. We're going to be having a conversation about safety culture, which I think is an enormously important topic that I don't get to talk about enough. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Evan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
I guess maybe I want to start by putting this in the context of some of the other interviews I've done. For many years, we did a food safety show, have done a food safety show. We continue to do a food safety show, and people talk about food safety culture as something that is everybody's responsibility. And of course, there's new hires that come in. You have to get them up to speed quickly because food has to be safe. And the new guy on the floor can really, cause some trouble if he's not taking it seriously. There's also the possibility of old hands who, get a little casual about things. That's food safety, but there's also safety as it relates to people. And I think maybe we can have a conversation about where some of the similarities lie between food manufacturing and food safety, but also just the idea that in a manufacturing space, it can be dangerous, and we need to have everyone be on the same page that work needs to be as safe as possible. How can I get into it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good starting point. So I'm actually also working as the interim quality manager at my plant, so it ties in rather nicely. And we were recently talking about this. And so when we talk about food safety versus people safety, there actually isn't a difference really in approach. The approach is more or less the same. The main difference is just sort of the focus of what we're talking about. Well, one, I'm talking about the safety of my people, my personnel, and the other, I'm talking about the safety of my product, which ultimately is really about the safety of my customer, which is still people at the end of the day. So from a quality standpoint, we'll start there. If you're talking about food safety, okay, we need to make sure we're making safe products so it's not going to get someone sick, so it's not going to cause any kind of issues for people. Okay, so that's one side of things. So how do we do that? Well, usually you're going to do, much like any other safety, you're going to do a hazard assessments. So when you look at like HACCP process or something like that, which stands for Hazard Analysis of Critical Control Points, and this is sort of your review for a food process where you're going to look at your process. You say, what are your hazards? What does the process look like? You're going to make process maps. You're going to put all that in. You're going to figure out, okay, where are places that could go wrong? What are our critical parameters? What are our critical control points? Do we have critical control points? These would be points that would basically control something to ensure that someone would get ill or something like that. Right? How do we measure that? What does good look like? What's bad look like? So you kind of do all that together. So essentially, you're doing a risk assessment. And then based off the risks you identify, you're going to go ahead and put some kind of plan or action in place. There's probably some kind of monitoring that you're going to have to do, some kind of review process. Obviously, everything has to be documented. And when you turn that over to safety, which is, of course, my emphasis as an EHS professional, as a safety professional, it's really the same thing, right? Okay, safety is the heart of safety is the hazard assessment. You do a hazard assessment, you figure out what your risks are, what your problems are, and then based on what you see, you say, okay, well, these are the things that we need to place. And so it's basically the same thing. The only difference is now we're worried about, instead of saying, well, what's wrong with, the drink that I'm making or I'm packaging, so the cup that we're making that you're going to drink the drink out of. Now I'm saying, well, what could happen to the operator, the person running the machine, making the cup? Okay, how could I get injured on that machine, right? You have moving parts, you have heaters, so you have burn potential, maybe there's amputation potential, right? There's any number of things that can happen there. And it's like, okay, well, how do we control for that? And so then when we talk about the cultural side, like, okay, well, what is culture? So the way I always talk about this during, orientation and stuff, when we have a long discussion about what a culture is. And basically, culture is just the accepted norms and behaviors in a given group, right? So whether you're talking about a nation, a country, a city, the plant, a company, culture is the way we do things, right? Not what we have written out in our plan, but what we actually do. That's really what our culture is. And so when we talk about safety culture, basically that means is a culture where safety or that risk assessment is part of everything we do, right? So I don't have to, as a manager from management side, if I tell someone, hey, go move that pallet over there, I don't like it here. I don't have to tell them, remember to wear your seatbelt, and remember to put on your glasses, and remember to do this, and remember to beep your horn, and remember to watch where you're going. I don't have to do all that, right? Because they know all that, and they're going to do it, and I know they're going to do it, right? And I can trust them to do that. So trust is a big part of it, actually. That's a big part of any healthy culture, is a level of trust. And so management needs to essentially earn that trust from the floor personnel. We're talking about a plant setting. You're not going to necessarily have it right away. You do have to earn it. And that's it's just a matter of transparency, saying, hey, this is where we are, this is what we're doing. Following through with things, showing that, when we say we're serious about something, we are actually serious about it. Last night we were talking about training. And one of the things I had said was, hey, training is a pretty big deal. That's where your culture starts, because that's where you're telling people this is how you do things. So obviously that's the start of culture, because culture is the way we do things. But that is also, while fairly simple, pretty involved. It takes a lot of time to actually do a good training program. It takes a lot of time to change a culture, and so it requires a level of commitment from the management all the way up. It starts at the top, because at the end of the day, the priorities that I as a manager have, or as anyone as an employee has, really is going to start with, well, what's my boss telling me? And safety shouldn't be, I always say safety shouldn't be a priority. It's just a cost of doing business. Because when I say the word priority, if I tell you, hey, this is a priority, the priority is that we don't knock this little cactus over, right? That's the priority right now. Okay, so when I leave, that's not the priority anymore, right? That's going to change. That's kind of the assumption with priorities. When I use the word priority, the assumption is this is a short-term thing. That doesn't technically what the word means, but that's what we kind of assume.
It's what we care about right now.
Yeah, it's what I care about right now. And so safety is something we have to care about right now all the time. And whether it's food safety, because, hey, if you get people injured, that's, an issue where we're getting people sick. So you have the moral side of things. And then from the business side, of course, like, well, look, if you get people sick, you're not going to be in business very long, right? And the same thing with safety for your employees. And it really does start up at the top. So I think when you mentioned, we were talking a little earlier about the importance of it, it is something which should be brought up in settings, conferences, discussions, leadership, and something like that, because it really does start up at the top. The people at the top are the ones who set the culture, right? Because you as a manager set the expectations for the people that are below you, and your manager does it for you. And so if my manager is coming to me and saying, why isn't that machine running? And my answer is, well, because the interlock is broken, so it's a safety hazard. If their answer is, well, I don't care, run it anyway, okay, well, then we don't value safety, right? If their answer is, oh, okay, I understand, we'll get it fixed, and then they check back, because obviously you've got to keep the stuff running, so they should check back and make sure it gets fixed and just stay down indefinitely, of course. But making sure that we address things, that's something we've made a lot of progress at my plant in that regard, where we've had people say, hey, there's this problem, there's this safety issue, I'm not going to run the machine right now until this gets fixed. And that's what we want. And that's what we tell people, and we're seeing that start to happen. So we're pretty happy.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that idea of, so if safety starts at the top and the management is saying it's important and they set the tone for a company, what advice do you have for leaders who might find themselves in a position where their culture has become complacent? Because I think safety sort of fades into the background when there hasn't been a problem in a while, or people think, well, we know this stuff already, because it's never fresh and new. It's always there. So what advice might you have to reinvigorate or re-energize a culture that maybe isn't taking it as seriously as they should?
Well, I think you raise a good point, because especially in manufacturing, there tends to be a lot of firefighting going on. And so when you're in firefighting mode, when you're trying to address these issues, I'm just trying to get this thing taken care of. And so it is really easy to forget about kind of the everyday, I know you got the machine running, but did you lock it out? Or did you follow this procedure? Did you do this process correctly? Right? I know I'm glad at the result, but it's important that we not only get the right result, but that we do it the right way. Because if we do it the wrong way, sooner or later, we're going to get a bad result. So I think in terms of management, the number one thing I would say is consider what I would say is your messaging. And so when I use the term messaging, I use that intentionally because it's different from what we say. Because we always say safety is important, like you say, right? Hey, it's important, so it's important. Let's move on and talk about some. Now let's get down business and talk about why this line isn't running, right?
What's our priority for the day?
Right. Let's set some priorities here. And the thing is with safety is, okay, we set those priorities, right? These are the production priorities, but what is the message of my actions, or what are the message of my media? Sometimes I'll heard this phrase once. I thought it was pretty good. They were talking about social media in the context, but they said, and what's the message of the media, right? So for example, they were talking about Twitter. This was on a podcast. It was Modern Wisdom. And they used to say, well, Twitter, the message of Twitter is you can say something valuable in, 200 characters or less. Actually, forget the number of characters. I don't have Twitter, or X, I suppose it's now called. And the question is, okay, well, is that even true or not? And how much value can be said in this little paragraph, not even really a full paragraph, right? A few sentences. And you can say some things in it, but really what it's really good for is just throwing out zingers and insulting people. That's what it's really good for. And when we think about what we do as leaders is, okay, people look, especially when we talk about people out on the floor, people listen to what you say, but they pay way more attention to what you do. And they will pay way more attention to the negative things you do than the positive ones. So if we sit there, let's say the two of us are running a plant, we say, hey, safety, safety, safety. There could be one time where I send the message that, hey, safety doesn't matter. Maybe it's something like, hey, the safety meeting is taking way too long. Let's say it's taking 40 minutes, right? Which is pretty normal for my safety meetings. They usually take more than that. But I have those every month. Okay, you got to get it done quicker, right? Okay, so what that tells me as an employee is, all right, well, you're telling me this is important, but you're taking this information, and instead of spending the time going over it, you're rushing through it. So what that tells me is it's actually not that important. You're just trying to check a box. That could be the one time that you ever did it in the year. They will remember that time for probably multiple years, and they will bring it up again. And for a good reason. And the reason is, well, if you say this is serious, you need to act like you take it seriously. I grew up in a big family, and my mom was always talking about, look, every time we would go everywhere and every time we went anywhere, my mom was always like, look, you are representing big families. I have said it to it. And so this idea of what am I modeling with my actions has always been kind of very big to me, right? And I guess I was indoctrinated in that regard. But I think it serves me well, because when I'm out there walking around, it's like, well, what am I showing people, right? I walk around the plant, I'll be picking like bits of pallet or trash off the floor, because stuff breaks, gets on the floor. It's part of running a plant. And I do that because that's what I want other people to do. And so if I want you to do that, I need to model that as best I can. Sometimes in union plants that can actually be a problem, so be careful with that. But I haven't run into that problem yet. But for the leadership standpoint is, remember, okay, when we say something's important, we need to consistently act as though it is. We need to say it is, and we need to act as though it is. So when I say safety is important, am I giving people a hard time because the line is down, because there's something wrong that needs to be fixed? Not to say that people sometimes aren't lazy and don't keep the line running, and hey, they're taking longer than you should. That happens, and that needs to be addressed as necessary, of course. But even when that does happen, we need to take the time to understand why that happens. So, like, why did it break? Sometimes people's taking too much time because they don't know where the tools are. They don't know where this is. They don't know where it was. Maybe they weren't trained right? So don't be too quick to kind of jump on people, right? Sometimes some people need a little encouragement, right? But take the time to understand what the problems are and what that person is trying to work through. And not only will you learn a lot, because you'll learn more about what the process is and what they're going on, you're going to pick up a lot of things that need to be fixed on when you do that. They will see that you care. They will see that you care, and they'll say, okay, if you have follow-up and you say, hey, I told him maybe it's something simple. Hey, I didn't have the right tool, so I've been using this makeshift thing and got me the right thing. It could be something as small as that. But at least it's a start where people say, okay, well, we are seeing change. That's a big thing with cultural changes is, do I see anything happening or improving, even if it's something small, right? nothing will kill a culture or morale quicker than just being in the doldrums. So you got to make sure you try to stay out of the doldrums.
I want to talk a little bit about these monthly meetings, because I think there is some real kernels there that other safety people might be able to take from the idea of you have a monthly rhythm where you get together, you take the time it needs. What are some of the things that you're bringing to your team's attention in those meetings?
Okay. So with safety, obviously a big part of safety is the idea of compliance. So there are training topics and things that you're required to train on an annual basis. And people do this different ways. Some people rely on online training. Sometimes they do a meeting at the end of the year or something. We just spend all day going over slides or something like that. I don't encourage that. I think that's just too much information at the end, and it's hard to absorb that. Online has a similar problem where the quality of training is there. So what I've always done, and many people do this isn't something that I invented, is a monthly meeting. So every month we have one or more training topics, depending on what those topics are, because some are pretty short, so you do a couple at once. Others are longer, so you just maybe have one. The meeting always starts with a review of, metrics, incidents. So we'll go over the incidents of the previous month. Hey, we had this number many first aids. Here's what they were. Well, okay, someone in this area, stubbed their toe, right? That hasn't happened, but, whatever the problem is, right? This happened. We'll review incidents at other plants which are in some way relevant to ours. So at Pactiv, we have a regular call, a couple times, twice a month, where plants will share incidents that occurred with each other. And so we can kind of see, oh, hey, this other plant had this problem. So is that something that is applicable to us or not? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if there's anything in there that I think would be worth people on the floor knowing, I'll bring that up. We'll review those. We'll review any updates. So if, we try to do a few safety improvements every month, our goal is to do at least 2. But where something where, hey, we have not just fixed something that was broken, but made something new and better, right? So for example, one thing was, hey, we, instead of having to dump these buckets into a tank that's, yay high, there's a pump system, right? Something like that, right? Just to kind of try to make sure people are aware that, hey, we are trying to do things to, again, drive the culture to make people realize, okay, hey, we are doing things. Because you don't always know, if one of the things that you'll have as a problem, especially as cultural changes, I as an operator, I care what's going on my machine. And if you fixed lots of things, let's say on someone else's machine, I don't really care about that. I only really care about the ones on my machine. And that's understandable. But trying to kind of market that and blow the horn a little bit on improvements we do is something else we do at the meeting. And then we spend time going through the training, and then that'll be the end of it or signs off on it. And that usually takes 45 minutes to an hour. And so I think the main difference, the main thing that I'm happy about, or the main thing I would say about those meetings is, for anyone else, would be, number one is make sure you're spending the time on it. Don't rush through them. A lot of times those monthly trainings or regular training topics are rushed through, or they are given to the supervisors to sign off the trainees or their employees. And I think involving employees or involving supervisors is actually a great idea, but you should be careful that what they are doing is still quality training. Because unfortunately, supervisors being very busy, sometimes what that can turn into is supervisor, here's a list of names and then a slide deck, and they go out on the floor and say, hey, would you mind signing off on this, please? And they say, oh, sure, and then they move on to the next person, and no one actually reads the slide deck. Not saying that happens everywhere, but that is a problem that can occur, and so you got to be careful with that, right? So again, if we're saying safety is serious, if we're saying this is important, we need to show that and act as if it is, and it does take a significant investment. Also reviewing incidents is, I think, important, letting people know what's going on, letting people know also, like, hey, this is something that happened to a coworker. It could happen to you too, if you aren't careful, or if this problem isn't fixed. So that's sort of what we do.
I appreciate we started from the position of, leadership has to set the tone and demonstrate that, like, it matters to them because people are watching and people take lessons even when you don't know you're teaching them. But I think part of culture also is when the grassroots reflects those values, they need to be recognized, rewarded, held up as good examples for others to follow. Can we talk about that side of things, where the people on the floor are demonstrating safety culture? How do we nurture and nourish that?
No, I think that's a good point. Positive recognition is definitely something good. Like, I've done things where, I would give people like gift cards or something like that for recognizing something or pointing things out. So we'll do that sort of a thing.
Giving them the confidence that they can speak up, they'll be rewarded.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, you want to do that for two reasons. One is because you want to reward good behavior, right? You get the behavior that you expect and reward, right? So if I reward good behavior, I'm going to get a little bit more of that. Doesn't mean you're going to get everybody. You're always going to have some people who just aren't interested. That's okay. But most people will come around. It takes some time, but they will come around. But the other thing you want to do with the recognition is, one is to reinforce the good behavior. And then two is, to your point, is show that, hey, we actually do want this. And I think another important part of that is in terms of a follow-up to, hey, I told Evan this. Okay. Did Evan do anything about it? Right? Because that's going to be a big thing. Because if I don't see any change, if I say, hey, I can go to my manager and tell him that this is bad or this needs to be fixed, and then he'll write it down and it goes in a box and I never hear from it again, okay, I'm not necessarily as enthusiastic about it. So making sure that we're having turnaround on that is important. So we do everything we can to get stuff done in as timely a manner as we can. And that's something certainly I would encourage. And safety, a lot of is follow-up. Follow-up's a big thing. I spend probably more time following up with people than anything else. But encouraging that behavior, recognizing it, and showing people that it does benefit. You sort of want to have that environment, again, to your point, where people are comfortable bringing up a problem, where they know, hey, if I go to my manager, I say, manager, this is how we're doing it. And honestly, this is not the way I'm supposed to be doing it. The manager's not going to give me a hard time. He's not going to say, why, he's not going to write me up. I'm not going to get fired for that. He's going to say, okay, well, thank you for telling me that. Why do you do it that way? What can we do to fix that? That's not to say you keep doing it that way. Okay, we got to stop, right? Stop and fix it. But I'm comfortable knowing that I can come to my manager and say, hey, here's a problem. Maybe I don't know how to fix this, right? It's just, I have that, for example, with my manager. So like my environmental manager, for example, we work very well together. I can call him up anytime and say, hey, this is a problem I noticed. How do we want to, this is what I think we should do. What do you think? And we'll just sit there and we'll work through it together. We'll pull up regulations together on it. We'll read them together. And so it's a very collaborative approach. And that's, I think, a effective and sort of healthy way towards that. Sometimes it's tempting for some leaders to think that the best way to be a leader is a person who gives commands. And a leader is not really a person who gives commands, in my opinion. Now, giving commands is part of it. Sometimes you have to do that. But a leader is really more a person who can figure out what the problems are and do what they can, basically fix those problems and work with their teams to do that, right? A leader gets the right people in the right places and helps them to do their jobs effectively, right? Sometimes that means, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Hey, you can't do that, right? And that's part of it. But there can sometimes be, but you need that kind of approach at all levels, right? So not only do floor and people need to feel that sort of support, and knowing that, hey, I can come here and I can bring up problems, and it's not going to be like just walking into a trap for myself. But managers need to feel that too, right?
Sure.
And that's almost is at least as important, because imagine whether it's plant level or above the plant level, corporate level, whatever that is, need to know that if I go to the next level, I'm going to get some amount, I'm going to get the support, at least that they can give me, right? They may not be able to give me everything I want, right? If I have to say, hey, I have a $7 million wish list of capital projects, well, they probably can't fix that all for me. At least not in a hurry, but at least we can get started on something, right? Maybe we can say, well, let's pick one or two. And
why don't we imagine one of the listeners of this episode has been transferred into a role where safety is now going to be one of their responsibilities as a leader. You have been working in the safety space for a while. What advice would you have for someone who has been transferred into this or promoted into this, and they want to make sure that they're hitting the ground running? They want to get the easy wins first. There are probably some things that they have to do from the beginning to make sure everything else is going to track well. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for someone who finds themselves in that position?
Right. So let's say maybe it's like, okay, your safety manager left and you're taking over or something like that, right? That's not uncommon. As I said, right, I'm interim quality manager, so that's my position. So I would say the first thing you want to do is, depending partially on what your familiarity with the role already is, I'm going to assume you know little to nothing about it. The first thing you're going to want to do is try to learn what are the requirements. So you're going to need to interface with other EHS professionals. First off, whoever the corporate EHS person is, if there isn't one, try to see if there are any other people in the company who may be working at other plants, right? So maybe you don't have a superior in EHS, but maybe there are some peers who work at another plant who can at least help you say, well, hey, here's at least the basic requirements. So, because one thing that you'll have an issue with is there are some things where you may have a calendar of tasks and, hey, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. Okay, so where do I get that? When do I do that? How do I do this task? Right? And that's stuff which you just need to get done. You aren't necessarily able to be like, well, look, I'll do it later. Right? Because a lot of stuff with EHS, one thing with EHS is everything's important, but a lot of the work doesn't bear instant results. So a lot of the times, let's say you do a hazard assessment. Okay, I do a hazard assessment. I get an answer. I'm going to need to get this thing fixed, and that's going to take time. So that's something you do need to get done. But there are some things in EHS which, if I do it tomorrow, it's not really going to matter if I do it today or tomorrow, probably. Hazard assessment is probably not a good example of that, to be honest. But, depending on what you find in your hazard assessment, so don't use that example. But a lot of the stuff is something like, I can do this later. I can make a new policy. I can write a new policy later. It doesn't need to be done today. The fact is, if I write a new policy, I can write a new policy way quicker than anybody can implement it, right? Because it takes time to implement, right? So it doesn't really matter if I do that right now. But certain tasks, hey, you need to get your electrical gloves, for example, right? They need to be dielectrically tested every 6 months, okay? Well, that just needs to be done. And you can do it, and you can only put that off so long because there is a due date and it needs to be done by then, right? And so when you have those due dates, so when you're new, you need to figure out what those due dates are, and there's probably a good chance you're going to see tasks, and you're saying, what is this? I don't know what this task is. How do I do this? And so that's where you need to be. You really do need, I would say, to be able to reach out to another EHS person, preferably, again, some kind of corporate regional person. If there is no such role, someone in another plant, if you got literally no one to reach out to at that point, you could try to reach out to some through LinkedIn. You could try to contact someone. And if you're completely alone, you would just have to work with your plant manager and do the best you can. And if something goes wrong, I did the best I can, and that's all I can do. And that's a big thing with, I would say, really any job, but in particular safety is, doing what you can, but understand that you are going to make mistakes. One of the facilities managers at my last job said that if you aren't making mistakes, you aren't working. And that's true to a large extent, because we could, I think, clarify it a little bit and say, if you aren't making mistakes, you aren't doing anything new, right? Because if you're doing something new, you're going to mess up. Hopefully, the goal is to mess up only in a small way, not a big way, right? But you're probably going to mess something up if you're doing new things. And so that's okay. Recognize that. And try to find someone who can help you with that if you're in that kind of a position. That would be what I would say.
I think that's a great note to wrap things up on, because I think it is one of those things that you have to start somewhere, learn from the examples of others, be willing to make some mistakes and learn from those too, and move forward with the idea of building that culture and setting that example.
I mean, also, the other thing I would add to that would be take a look at what was done in the past. Because usually if there's some task or something, especially if it's a recurring task, it's been done before. So you can probably see if you can find the file and say, okay, well, this is at least I can at least see what they did, so I can at least try to do that. Even if I have no one to help me, at least it gives me a starting point. So,
and again, that idea of reinvigorating a culture, you have to understand what has been done in the past to think about retooling it in the future.
Yes, you need to start by talking to people on the floor. What have they done? What have we done in the past well? What have we done in the past badly? And be open and honest with people. If you're like, hey, man, we screwed this up, admit it. Man, we screwed this up. Everyone out on the floor already knows we screwed it up. Not telling them is not hiding anything. They know, so just admit it, right? Be open and honest with people. Honesty will get you pretty far, right? Because we need to be able to trust our employees, and they need to be able to trust us. And frankly, the trust is going to start with the management. Management's going to have to win that trust first, most likely.
Absolutely. Well, Ed, I think you said that at the very beginning. So again,
I think so, yes.
A great place to
Safety is very circular, right?
Well, it should be, because it's iterative, and every time you just want to make sure people go home at the end of the day safe.
Yes, correct.
Evan, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint Podcast Series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.